My name is Alex. I'm the events manager for the Fringe. Just before we start the panel, we do have a few announcements. So the 2020 dates were just announced. The festival starts on June 11th, with previews being held through June 4th through 9th. Opening night party is going to be on June 10th, and the full festival runs through June 11th through 28th. The scholarship panel was just announced. That is going to be this Wednesday from 7 to 9 p.m. at the complex. The scholarships are available to first-time Hollywood Fringe producers who contribute to the ethnic, cultural, racial, or mental or physical diversity of the LGBTQ+ diversity of the Hollywood Fringe community. Office hours will be Tuesday, December 10th at the Broadwater Plunge from 7 to 10 p.m. If all these dates are confusing you or causing you panic, it's time to sign up for our e-newsletter and follow our social media where we post all of this and more. You can sign up on our website, hollywoodfringe.org, and follow us on social at Hollywood Fringe. Finally, join us later for our sessions including speed dating, where you can sign up before lunch, and our mixer afterwards at the Broadwater Plunge right here at 5 p.m. Like all of our events, these sessions will be recorded and posted to Fringe TV, the place out to check out all things Hollywood Fringe. Finally, at lunch, Jessie Boy is offering 10% off your whole purchase. You just have to mention that you're with the Fringe. Really good Korean food. So that's 2 blocks that way, right near the Starbucks on Vine. And great, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
My name is Monica Nicholas. I'm a longtime Fringe participant and volunteer. And I'm here with some friends today to talk about immersive theater and immersive storytelling, particularly at the Hollywood Fringe. We are all part of an organization called LEA, that's the League of Experiential and Immersive Artists, and we're an industry group for people working in the immersive space in Los Angeles and beyond. So we can talk more about that if it comes up, but suffice it to say, one part of our mission is education and providing opportunities for people perhaps new to the immersive world to get access to people who've been working in this space and access to information that they need to blossom in their careers in immersive. So personally, I've been working in the immersive world for about 5 years. I've done a couple immersive shows, 3 different immersive shows at Fringe. It's often where we pilot a work before then doing a longer run elsewhere. Last year we did a show called Rochester 1996. Year before that, 2 years before that, we did a show called Red Flags, which is a one-on-one show about dating. And way back when, we did a show called Hamlet Mobile, which is Hamlet in a van. But I'm going to try not to talk too much today. I'm going to be asking these guys questions, and then I'll chime in and answer your questions as well. So if the panel could introduce themselves, that would be a great next step. Derek, you want to go first?
Hi, my name is Derek. I am the artistic director of a company called Ceaseless Fun. We've been making immersive work as a company for about 3.5 years now, but I've been working in the immersive space for a little bit longer. Didn't totally recognize that immersive was a bin that my work fell under until we started the company. But yeah, it's been about 5 or 6 years making this type of work, and as far as our past Fringe experience, we produced a show in 2018 called The Stars, which was a one-audience, hour-long walk down Hollywood Boulevard, guided by several actors.
My name is Noah Nelson. I'm the founder and publisher of No Proscenium, which covers the immersive arts and entertainment. Also was one of the producers of the Immersive Design Summit, which took place in the past 2 years up in San Francisco and is being reforged as Here Summit in Pasadena next March. That's a event where we bring people from the various immersive disciplines, theater, theme parks, escape rooms, virtual reality, under one umbrella to discuss the trends and the underlying principles of design in our field. NOPA's been around for 6 years now. We cover all that stuff, and I am personally very interested in how this stuff works and where it continues to develop.
My name is Tommy Hung. I am a consultant and designer for immersive interactive experiences, activations, etc. I co-created an escape room called Stash House and an interactive museum called Museum of Selfies. I've consulted on 3 Fringe shows and seen dozens. I really like playing with the idea of how interactivity and gameplay can help further narrative. So it's sort of my specialty, but I also adore just straight storytelling. So it's trying to find these sort of spectrums to play with, and I think Fringe is a great venue for that.
Cool. And so we get to know a little bit about you, because it's a nice small group. We can get cozy. Who's a first-time Fringer, or just considering Fringe for the first time? Everybody.
Oh, wow.
Yay.
Wow.
Do it, you won't regret it. And who is considering an immersive show specifically right now? Ish. Okay, cool. Okay, so mixed. Cool. Well, I promise this will be interesting, even if it's not quite your cup of tea in the end. But that's actually one of the things we'll talk about. So let's get the big question out. This is the $1 million question for any event about immersive ever, which is, what does that word mean? And specifically, what are audiences expecting when you label something immersive theater? So it's kind of a 2-part question. Anybody who wants to jump in, go for it.
So, you know, we keep a glossary at NoPro of the different terms and what immersive means and everything. And this year, for immersive theater in particular, I finally settled on a pretty succinct definition, which is immersive theater is a play that you play, right? So it's a play, like you would make a regular play, but it's one that the audience can play in some capacity. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's something they can win. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are playing all the parts in it. There's a spectrum of interaction that's going on. Something like Sleep No More, you're mostly just moving around and seeing the different parts.
Let's not
Yeah.
assume people
Right. Well, how
know
many?
anything about immersive.
Yeah,
So
so-
what's Sleep No More?
I mean, I don't want to do too far down the litany, but Sleep No More is like the big immersive theater show. Like, if people have seen one or talk about one, it's a show that's been running in New York for the better part of 10 years. It's a dance theater piece that takes place in a 5-story building. All the audience wears masks, and the degree of interaction that you have is it's free roam. You can go wherever you want, and the performers are operating on tracks, essentially. Like, it loops 3 times, and the audience can follow whoever they want to follow, or like jump. Like, 2 characters meet, and I'm going to follow this one instead of that one. And the underlying work is the Scottish play. So if you have familiarity with that, you're able to navigate a little bit easier. And that's just one form that an immersive theater piece can take. But so long as you have some sort of different relationship to the audience than they're sitting in a seat and they're watching someone perform and that's it, that's when you started to enter into our world.
Derek, do you define immersive similarly?
I think we think about it the same way. I don't like to use the word play in the way that you do, because I don't really think of it as like gamified for me. But I think a lot of immersive theater you'll see does like that. It's a really good definition for a lot of people. The one that I always just throw out is it's theater that implicates the audience within the fiction of the show. So you are not outside of the world, you are in the world, whatever that means. And for me, I think that could mean like the audience, you're all sitting in seats, and in some way we find a way to make you sitting in the seat watching the show part of the world. And to me, that can be an immersive production. So I think maybe there's a little bit on the fringe that's different about what we mean when we say these things, but I think we call most of the same things immersive. So.
Yeah.
Well, when I say play, I don't necessarily mean gamified. Like, I think of it as like the way an actor plays a role, right? So, and that might be the extent to which the interaction is going to be. I mean, the thing that excites me most about an immersive theater piece is being opposite an actor and responding authentically to them emotionally and watching their performance change the way if I was playing a part with a scene partner, their response would change. So that sense of play, as opposed to, like I said, winning or competitive or solving a puzzle.
So, Tommy, when you go see something that's calling itself immersive theater, what are some of the things that you'll expect to happen?
I think actually why I find immersive so compelling is that I don't know what to expect. The word has sort of come to a lot of meanings now, But the idea of, I always see it in a sense of, how am I going to relate to the piece? Is it a matter of, I just happen to be sitting on stage and the piece is happening around me and I don't have any relationship outside of the fact that I'm sitting on stage? Or is it something that I can actually impact or affect the story? I like the fact that there are so many ways to approach it. And from all of the shows I've seen, Monica, you and Derek have done, even the relationship of how the audience participates or relates to the story changes from show to show. And I think the idea is people expect to be surprised, usually in a narrative, the bad version of a murder mystery, who's the killer? And the narrative can surprise you from the sake of something contained entirely within the plot. But with immersive and interactive works, the way you relate can also be a surprise. And the way that can even change over the piece by itself. So I don't have expectations. I tend to expect maybe certain performers or certain producers might go within the same sort of framework over and over again. But even then, like I said, two great theater companies sitting on the stage play with the way audience relates to the piece, which, again, to me is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, if you just think about the different productions that have been in Fringe that have been labeled as immersive, I mean, you have all different types of work that have played with that question in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
I mean,
Can you give some examples?
well, yeah, look at your work, right? Where you threw on.
Go on.
I mean, you're sitting right here. I get to talk about it. But like, so Rochester, puts us very much like we're sitting in a car with some of the characters. They drive you around in a van for part of it. You attend a church service. And while you're not talking directly to the characters a lot, you're privy to a lot of their private conversations. And you're kind of along for the ride in a lot of ways. Whereas Red Flags, I mean, it's a direct. We are having a conversation, you and the actor, the entire time.
Right.
It's a one audience member show. There's very different emotional expectations. There's very different stakes there. There's different levels of autonomy with playing with that. And then Hamlet Mobile. I almost said Hamlet Machine.
People do that.
Hamlet Mobile. You're even more like a fly on the wall than Rochester, I think, and it gets
True.
into more an abstract
It's the least
space,
interaction,
Yeah.
but it's also our most fully designed piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that you go inside this van and there's basically a tiny world contained within the van. You go sit inside it, everything's covered in wood, there's little cabinets and trinkets and bookshelves, and it's a fully immersive physical space, which is different.
Well, also, depending on which, because it was exploded out into these different chapters, depending on which chapter of the Ham Van show you went to, you might have a different role. Your relationship to it changed.
Yeah.
Michael Tara Garver, who's a professor at NYU and a practitioner, she talks about casting the audience. Right? What role are you giving the audience in the work is an absolutely critical part. Something that's interesting about Rochester is that your role changed from act to act. It was a 3-act piece. In Act 1, you were a new member of a congregation or a prospective member of a church congregation. In Act 2, you were inside the head of one of the main characters, essentially, while you're in the van. Your flies on the wall.
Some people said you almost functioned like her journal.
Yeah.
That there was a confessional nature to how she would speak to you, but no one else could see you.
Yeah, and in the 3rd act, you were pure flies on the wall.
Yeah.
And there was even a moment in that piece where like the lead character calls out that your role has changed, and you always felt like you knew what you were supposed to be doing. That's kind of the funny thing. It's like what's exciting is when you go to one of these pieces, you may not know what's expected of you until you've entered, and people who are fans of this stuff, that's often what they want. The people who are deep divers and are really into it. For folks who don't necessarily know what it is, they might have a lot of anxiety over but what am I supposed to do? How you're communicating that role, how you're cluing people into what is expected of them, that's a critical part of your design.
This is a concept called onboarding.
Yeah.
And when we talk about play, I'm just gonna put my academic hat on for just a sec, and then I want Tommy to talk about this. When we talk about play, we're using this theory of play from a theorist named Huizinga. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He was from here. He lived a long time ago. But he developed this theory of play, that play is a sacred space that is separated from the rest of the world, and it proceeds by different rules than we encounter in our day-to-day life. So he describes a magic circle for play, which can be a physical delineation between the real world and the play world. Think about a basketball court. There's different rules on the court than there are in the stands which is like real life, and then there's game life. But it can also be imaginary, like we're playing tag. Okay, the game has started now. Like if somebody tags you before you say it
That's it.
started,
No
that's
tag
not.
outs.
It's like, no, the game hasn't started yet. That's entering the magic circle. So in Immersive, we talk about this concept of onboarding and offboarding, which is coming into the world of play and leaving the world of play. And Tommy, I know your Stash House in particular has some interesting things about onboarding. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the escape room I created is called Stash House, and most escape rooms are viewed as sort of like family fun centers. You go into a facility, you sign a waiver, and then you walk through a door and now you're in ancient Egypt, or there's some theming to the nature of it. But it's really just skinning a room with some puzzles that may or may not relate to the space. And I wanted to create a space that tied into the sense of the magic circle. It's very clumsy with most games, with most escape rooms, because it's very clear that you're not in ancient Egypt. You know you're at Hollywood and Highland, and right at that door is the real world. And so there's the idea of playing with this magic circles, and there is no right or wrong way to do it. In the sense of sometimes the magic circle is just very obvious, and you're not meant to be transported somewhere except in your imagination, which is perfectly fine. Children get tucked into bed at night, and you say once upon a time, and they go on a journey. Human beings are all wired to go on story adventures. The ability as a creator to be able to make your magic circle a little bit more thin, in the sense that you walk in a space and you're in the world that you're in without the realization you've crossed into something. So Stash House is essentially walking into a drug dealer's apartment and having to flush drugs, with the idea that there is no magic circle that you're visibly walking through. There is walking through the door, but you open the window, you look out, you're still where you're in K-Town, you're on the street you're in. So we wanted to create a space where, by making that magic circle almost invisible, people walk in and the surprises, the context of why you're there is sort of an easier way for them to buy in to the space and to the story. And so that's one of the things I love playing with, is even though we are a game and an escape room, the goal is to tell a story where you are cast as a group of people being inducted into a gang with a high pressure sort of task to do. And that was always the goal, was to make it very clear there's a circle there, you're stepping into a world, and when you are finished with the experience and walk out our door, the circle closes and you leave it, but that it's barely imperceptible, so that this journey feels like it's following you. And so there's things you can do that I really admire. And again, this is not one size fits all. This is fitting something to inform the audience and make it comfortable for them, making it clear for them. You know, there's a thing in alternate reality games, which are games that take place in the real world, where you might go to a website that feels like it's for a doctor and it's not really real, it's for a doctor in a fiction, where the magic circle, again, is very invisible. And the idea of conveying the sense of where does that end? You do want to make it clear to audiences when things are not real and when they are real, but making it possible for them to discern those worlds so people don't go down a rabbit hole and get stuck thinking. You would never say, okay, we're gonna open the door to walk in the street, and this street is safe. The cars will stop for you. Obviously that is very irresponsible. But when you play with the real world, you can do interesting things. Like when you go to our website for the escape room, we list a gentleman named Ray as the owner, and that me and my business partner work for him. Ray is not real. He is the antagonist of the game, but he has an email address. And when you buy your ticket, he emails you, and people write back to him. And on all of our social media and all of our business profiles, he is the owner. So we make the fiction seem a little bit more real. And when you buy your ticket, that world building begins. You feel like you are going to go meet with Ray. People know the story going in. And to us, that's something that's really exciting. I don't think every game or experience or show should do that, but if it can work for your storytelling, if it can pull people in, and what's the harm of them thinking Ray is real when he's not? So we play to be very careful that people don't feel cheated or lied to, or that they're going to do something irresponsible because of this fictional world building. But when they walk into space and realize, oh shit, this guy isn't real, he's a villain, and he's been emailing me, that sense of the world grows a little bit. In reality, when you go to our website, you're technically walking into our circle. But it's done in a safe and responsible way, and I think it's something we'll address, is being a safe and responsible creator about how you onboard and educate and offboard as well.
Yeah.
I want to, just add to that a little bit, because I think Tommy's talking a lot about how to make that magic circle, I like the word thin, making it seem thin so you're not quite sure when you've entered it and it seems seamless with the real world. And I think something I've always really enjoyed about Immersive is being able to play with that in ways that feel like heightened or a little more like thematically related to the work. So something we try to do with a lot of our shows, not all of them, is make the magic circle very clear up front, right? When you walk into a normal proscenium show, it's clear when the show starts. The lights come down, the curtains come up, and now the show has begun, and then the show has a clear ending, right? We stand, we applaud, the lights come up. Anyways, I've always loved making the beginning of the show very clear about when things begin. We've had shows where a curtain reaches through, or a hand reaches through a curtain and brings you physically into the world. Like that line is very clear, but I always want to make the line very unclear at the end of the show. Because something that's always frustrated me is I feel like the moment you stand up and applaud a show and you go out to the lobby, you get a drink and you start talking to your friends, there's a certain magic to me that's always a little bit lost when you leave that space, when you've left the magic circle, and now it's a memory. It's no longer what you're living, it's a memory that you have lived. So for me, trying to make that very thin at the end and almost invisible at the end kind of brings whatever feeling you had in the show into your real life. So an example was, for the show we did last year, They Who Saw the Deep, the characters existed only within the space we were using. This is a show where we literally reached through a curtain and dragged you into the show to start the show, one-on-one, one audience member at a time. And the way the show ends is that a character then escorts you out of the space and for the first time leaves the space with you, walks into the street with you, maybe walks a whole block with you, and then tells you one of their favorite things about Los Angeles. Just kind of grounds whatever you saw in there in the city that you're living in. In some cases, we pointed out specific landmarks or told you to walk in a certain direction. Another show we did, the Fringe show I did 2 years ago, Stars. Like I said, it was a walk down Hollywood Boulevard where each character kind of gave you a meta scene about the last scene. So the first scene is you are a director meeting with an actor, and the actor is trying to get you to cast them. And the next performer is going to approach you in the street and be like, oh, you were talking to her? She doesn't know what she's talking about. Let me tell you the real story about Hollywood. And it kind of builds from there. The last scene just tells you, go walk to Hollywood and Highland and just see something. It's worth going down there. And you don't really know necessarily if there's going to be something waiting for you or not. But the idea is to keep the joy of the show, that sense of discovery, and just send you off into the world without any clear end to the magic circle.
One thing I want to point out from both of their examples is notice they're talking a lot about a lot of intentionality around the relationship of the audience to the work that they're building, right? That there's an elasticity of perception. You can go down a rabbit hole looking into theories around phenomenology, around the idea that this stuff is being assembled by the audience. You're playing with perception. You're playing with conveying the rules of the world to the audience and letting them know how this fiction that they are about to enter, how they can exist within it. That goes into kind of role building. One way to think about the role of a director in an immersive is that you're not just directing the performers, you're directing the audience. You're setting up scenarios for the audience to then exhibit behavior through. So you might think about how you rehearse your actors in a straight play, how you might block them, or if you're trying to get your actors to enter into a certain relationship with each other, you want to apply the same kind of logic to your audience in an immersive. Even if you've got something where you might have 30 people in a room with just 2 performers, how are you staging that? I like to talk about this now as you're not staging a scene, but you're making a scene. Think about the logic of how events happen in real life, right? And not just how they happen if you want them to be performed and perceived.
This actually gets into, this is one of my favorite things to talk about in immersive, and gets into this idea of how much can you plan ahead for? How much can be scripted? And there's a huge spectrum of improv to fully improv to fully scripted within immersive. So I'd love to hear everybody talk a little bit about finding the balance between planning ahead and rolling with the punches, both from a creative and storytelling perspective, and also from a safety perspective, if you want to go there as well.
Sure. I can start.
Okay.
It depends on the show. It entirely depends on the show. There's a lot more you can plan for when you're dealing with a one audience member show. If you have a small audience, it's much easier to place that one person, to predict what they're going to do, to play test it in certain ways that you really feel like you're covering all your bases. For bigger audience, the bigger the audience, the more difficult it's going to get. Controlling 100 people is difficult through a space. Controlling how 100 people move through a space is a challenging thing to do. That's what you need to think more about. Something you need to play test probably more. I think probably the best perspective for me to give here is just to talk about scripting. So everything Ceaseless Fun does is all devised. We work on original material and we generate the content of the show in the room. We never start with a script, we start with some ideas and we work on it together. What I think is useful about using the devised method in Immersive is that if you have any kind of audience agency, there are going to be moments that the script doesn't work for, right? There's going to be moments where the actor is going to have to respond to something that just happened, or else they have to ignore it, right? But ignoring it breaks the immersion. If you ignore what is happening in front of you, it doesn't feel immersive anymore. So for us, our scripts generally look like maybe half of the script is written down in a way that we would recognize as like, this is what a script looks like. And I'd say about half of it, maybe the less pivotal moments of the story are often outlined. Like you have to get through points A, B, and C, but we're not going to script exactly how to do it. We want to do it in a more responsive way. We want to do it in a way that responds to what the audience is doing or what they're saying or what they're looking at, right? We want to bring them into the world. So in that way, improv tools, very useful in Immersive, at least in the way that I direct immersive pieces. And yeah, I think we can talk about safety and everything too. But I'll let someone else talk.
Yeah, we can circle back.
pun-
We can circle back to safety.
Pun on safety. Playing off something Derek just said, when you're operating kind of in a so I'm going to throw a term of art at you, sandbox. Like we talk about sandbox shows sometimes. That's where people have the ability to roam around freely. Think of it like playing in a sandbox, right? That's why we call it that. It comes also from the sandbox video games, things like Grand Theft Auto, right? Where you can do whatever you want, but there's also story things you can interact with, and you can choose whether you're playing the story or just racing cars and blowing up things. When you're operating in any kind of sandbox structure, it helps if the characters and the actors have a very strong sense of what they want from the world, what they want from the audience, right? You can give the audience a lot of power to kind of run around and do things, but if you sort of just want to rely upon the audience to make their own fun, then you are just kind of dropping kids off in a sandbox, but giving them no tools and being like, cool, enjoy yourselves. And then the audience is going to be like, there was nothing for me to do. When you plop actors in there, when you plop characters in there, and they know what they need, right? They're looking for people to provide them with things. And that need can be derived not just from the other characters, but even better from the audience. And not just the sense of an actor needs an audience to like feel good about themselves, but the character needs something and needs something specific from the audience. Then you can start really getting this engagement going on. And at that point, you don't necessarily need like hard scripting, but the characters got to know what their objectives are, what their motivations are, and then you can kind of have emergent play go from there.
But I will just in order to get, at least in my experience, to get actors to be comfortable and effective at doing that, it takes a lot more rehearsal time, right? You are just practicing, you're flexing a muscle, right? You're practicing this ability to inhabit a character, but inhabit that character in a more autonomous way, like off book, where we're living, breathing in this character, and we're ready to respond to any situation that arises in the room. Within that character. That's hard to do. That's a hard thing to do as a performer, and I think we spend a lot of time just trying to work on that muscle outside of everything else that's scripted.
Especially from working with performers and knowing that it's a ton of training and training in different ways. Mm-hmm. I think it's getting to know the role incredibly well, where that character, it's not just relying on you walk on stage in a proscenium-based show and have your lines and you get from A to B regardless every single night. And if there's a fuck up somehow, you just either ignore it or go with it and move on. With this kind of material, the way I usually approach it is giving people, similar to how Derek does it, is you have what I call, like, I don't like using the word crutch, but like a paddle. A thing they can glob onto that is a memorized monologue or piece or scenes that they have down pat, that are sort of the comfort zones of both defining the character and also things they can fall into that are comfortable, that if they have a moment of uncertainty, they can fall into. The other side of it is the completely improvised side of it, where you know the motivations, you know the character, you know every aspect of this character. And similar to the way the show Curb Your Enthusiasm does most of their things, is they'll write an outline. And the idea is, okay, Larry, in this scene, we need to have Larry buy an ugly sweater. The way that happens, it can be completely emergent, what happens in that scene. And you let the character walk in knowing what they want, and the way they get to that point can be entirely decided based on the interaction between the performers. What I love from the result of doing this is there are times when I am in a scene with a character and they're talking to me, and I'm able to respond freely. And our conversation will segue into something that feels very deep and feels scripted, but I can't tell where the improvisation ends and the script begins. Because it feels like we're actually engaged in a conversation and that I'm helping push the story forward. That does not happen by accident. That happens because of a ton of training. On top of the narrative training, it comes from a person knowing all of the logistical sides of it. Knowing what happens if a person breaks the rules, if they're not supposed to speak or touch someone, how do I get them back into, in a safe way, to the role that's defined for them without breaking things? Obviously, during a deep emergency, you will need to cut things and deal with that safely. But is there a way to, an audience member not knowing there's a no touching rule, how do you safely in world acknowledge that and get them back to the space so they know, oh shit, I didn't realize that, I'll go back to it without breaking the narrative?
Right.
Is there a way also to say, in 10 minutes, they need to be in the next room? How does the actor know, okay, we're jamming, having great conversation, but I gotta get this last beat of narrative bit out before they move to the next space? They can't go back behind this curtain. How do I make sure narratively I am physically in this point? So you have to go through a ton of training to go through the narrative, the logistics, and what happens if I have a problem audience member. And I do that training by literally working with performers I work with and trying to be a bad audience member.
I was going to say those are the best rehearsals.
Yes,
Yeah.
I used to be a terrible audience member for the whole day.
The way I frame it is if you want to design for the 3 worst case scenarios, it's like a triangle. And as long as you can build a fence around that and train your performers to handle those kind of audience members, you're good. The 3 types that I see are a new person that doesn't know what to do. What happens if I break the rules? Or I just stand there and do nothing the entire time? How does that actor respond and get that person to come forward or to push them within the box of saying, okay, no touching, but without breaking the scene? Again, provided that they're not deliberately breaking the rules or being obnoxious or putting people's safety at risk. The other one is a diehard who's like, I want to solve and do all the things. How do you keep people that are entirely competitive or aggressive? Again, same thing within the space. And last
Those
one,
people will also show up even if you're not doing a show that has puzzles. For instance, Rochester had no puzzles, very much not about puzzles, and yet at one point people like started tearing apart one of the scenes to like find something they thought had been an idea we'd planted, which we did not.
and
So
then,
they're- they might show up.
Yeah, the diehards that want to solve and do everything, not because they're trying to break things, but because they're excited and they don't quite know the context in which things relate to them as an audience member.
Yeah.
And then the last one are the trolls that are just there to deliberately watch the world burn. And they're people, again, if you are compromising safety or issues of breaking the show, you can completely kick those people out. But people that are trolls that are, once they find the edge of an experience, they'll back away. But the idea is, how do you train or deal with those kinds of things? And it's literally by going through with experience, by having people work with your actors or working with your performers and finding what is the worst case scenario that can happen. An audience member does nothing. An audience member breaks the rules. An audience member tries to be aggressive with the story or pushing things or moving ahead in the scene. And training around those and setting up a framework for almost equipping your actor and your performers with tools to know, how do we handle these situations?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about actor training specifically. Kind of segue from kind of big picture, what is immersive, to more like tactical things for directors and writers. So I have some stuff I want to share on this too, but when you're training actors, when you're casting actors, what are you looking for? How are you doing your casting processes? And know if you want to chime in on what you think makes a great immersive actor.
Right.
How are you training them before you get to that test run or play testing phase, which is critical.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does that process look like till then?
So I literally just ran auditions like 3 weeks ago, so I'm fresh off this. And I think, I mean, obviously you're looking for people who fit the roles, or people who you think are talented, or people who excite you to work with. But I think from an immersive specific standpoint, it's about comfort. I ask, we give out sides in the audition room, and we ask people to just read a side like you typically would in an audition. And then I don't tell them I'm going to do this, but then I ask them to do it as a one-on-one for my associate director. And I see, okay, when you're in a one-on-one situation here, how do you control this person? How comfortable are you? Or do you do something inappropriate? We just kind of like do a little litmus test. And obviously someone who's totally untrained in this, I'm not going to immediately cast them out. But it's like, are you comfortable? Are you comfortable in this like intimate setting. Are you comfortable acting here? And if I feel like you're uncomfortable, or if I feel like you're like not respecting someone's boundaries or something, that's an immediate no, right? So that's a litmus test that we have to do. And the best people are excited about it, right? The best people know how to engage in a one-on-one. They maybe like they use touch in some way, but in a totally appropriate and not intrusive way, you know? So you're just gonna get that litmus test of what feels comfortable. As far as training, for me, it all comes back to the ensemble. For me, it's like, I feel like when we have a group of actors who all know how to inhabit their roles together as an ensemble, it's very easy to turn that outward. So what we do a lot of is world building, and we'll do this before we even script. I'll do exercises where, first we just, we start moving like our characters. We do a lot of like movement. I work a lot in viewpoints personally. So we do a lot of just like movement-based work. We all start to feel like, what does this world feel like to move around in? What do we feel like when we're here? We start like I'll start assigning lines, right? So you can only use this one sentence to talk. And now we're in world. We all have a limited vocabulary. We have a very small amount of things we can do, but we are in the world. And then we just keep adding ingredients to that world. So maybe if it's a more naturalistic play, we go and we find ways to do like that improvised dialogue, but now within the world we've created. Or if it's something, a lot of my work is a little more abstract, a little more heightened, we'll continue to add on this like poetic text, and we'll continue to find ways to make it a more movement-based gestural world. But I think that world building is critical, because once an actor feels comfortable existing in this space with their ensemble members, it's very easy to add audience into the equation, I think. And then the final thing I'll just add is we always have a day, maybe like a third of the way through the rehearsal process, once we're familiar, once the ensemble's kind of up and moving, it's a mechanics immersive training. How do you guide an audience member in a comfortable way? How do you approach someone to touch them? How do you get kind of nonverbal consent from someone to continue a scene? What are we looking out for when we're doing a one-on-one? Like, what are kind of some signs that someone might be uncomfortable? I mean, just like all the kind of, I try to do the bad audience member thing where I'm like, how would you control someone in this situation? How would you move an actor? Like, how do we control a large mass of people? It's just all those questions, all those like specific scenarios that you can imagine. We just run through mechanics for all of that. So we have one very mechanical day, and then that's in everyone's mind, and I can kind of remind them or adjust as necessary. Yeah, that's the basics.
Yeah.
So.
I'm always looking for actors who are very good listeners, right? People who have that ability to connect, right? A large amount of the time, what the audience is looking for in an immersive piece is they want to feel seen, right? Like, that's the dopamine hit they're coming for. Is I went to this, and the things they're most excited about is like, I went to this, I felt seen. I felt like they understood me. That can take a lot of different forms. But the quintessential element is that ability for an actor to make a connection with you, even if it's just for a moment. In the old days, like years ago, I would describe it as like, a great immersive actor is kind of like the midpoint between a film actor and a theater actor. They know how to use their body and move through space, but they kind of live in the close-up, right? They live in this space where it's all about what's in here, but what gets really interesting is when they're trying to pull that out of you as well, right? Even if you don't have the power of speech in a show, right? You might have been told to be quiet, or you might be wearing a mask. They're still searching for something. Right? It's as if the answer to the secret of the universe lies within you. That's a quality that those performers bring. I think when it comes to, we ran some auditions for a VR piece and with a bunch of the immersive actors in town, and there we were doing like a lot of like pop-up devising stuff and really kind of centering on this idea of, can the performers step beyond performing, right? It's not about pushing out, but about drawing in, right? And if someone's got that instinct, then you can kind of work and develop with them. But you do, particularly on the mechanical side of things, like you want to watch out for people whose maybe like first instinct is to like, slap their arm on someone's back and like drag someone in close, and just that, things of that nature, like how they're setting the tone, right? We do a lot in terms of, humans we learn by mimicry, and you want to watch the performers to know that they're conveying how the audience should behave through their own behavior, right? Like, the audience will quickly pick up on that. But also that's another way to kind of like, if you're having problematic audience members, like that's another way to diffuse it, right? Can you that's not how we behave without even saying it. It's like, no, we're gonna reset and some of those. So people who are good at that, right? If you get a good con person in your cast, you're gonna be fine. So.
There's a lot that you can teach with immersive, but I think also what you're talking about, just like fundamentally, sometimes they're just social skills. Sometimes they're just like your ability. I mean, they are.
True.
It's your ability to read a situation, to understand how someone's going to react to what you do. They're just kind of on a level. I think some of it's just a little subconscious and that's what I'm saying. That litmus test is important because a lot of it you can teach. But sometimes if you have someone who just doesn't feel like they're picking up on what their scene partner is giving them, that's someone that I probably can't work with.
Yeah, social emotional intelligence is a thing, and that's definitely something.
Yeah, and you don't need someone who's like absolutely amazing at it, like in the cast necessarily. You don't need every cast member to be absolutely amazing at it. But if you got a couple of people who are really good at that, like that's gold. That's who you want to cast.
You can also instinct and trust are the two things, but also a sense of ownership. I think working with performers that get a sense of they get the role and they get what you're doing. I think describing intention is really valuable because there are certain, I think, performative training schools that are not just improv, but also stand-up comedians, people that have been on stage and know how to read a room and respond. I think it's the idea of being aware of who you're standing across from. Not everyone that goes to a show is going to be fully comfortable. Remember, like I talked about, you have the diehards people that love to go and get their dopamine and adrenaline hits from this kind of stuff. But what if you're a first-time immersive audience member and you don't know what the hell to expect? You might be a little bit more reserved. And if you're doing a one-on-one scene that is meant to be intimate and emotional, the way you play off one person versus another may not be the same. And so being able to sit with someone and trust them to trust their instincts and have them go through different tests and things to make sure they have a toolkit and the ability to read and react to people in real time is really valuable and adjust. Because there are certain things I've worked on where, if it's a game, in quotes, and you're asking of the audience member to do something or to play along, at what point do they win? Designing an experience where there's one moment I had in an experience where you basically have to convince someone to give you something. And the idea is that you are not trying to win. Everyone gets the item given to them. But the point is you have to prove yourself worthy. How do you gauge the person sitting across from you as worthy? It's working with the actor to make sure they know in fiction, why is the character trusting this person? If someone is very aggressive and wants to win, make it harder for them. Make them have to work for it. What if they're not as aggressive? What if they're more sheepish and don't really know what to do? You can then be a little bit more forthcoming and work with them. The goal is to make that experience rewarding one-on-one with that person sitting across from you, not one size fits all. And so it's working with the performer and saying, okay, how do you approach this? And building that sense of instinct to know, yes, you want to make, I always see it as like a swimming lesson. When I was a kid, I would dive into the water and my teacher would swim away from me. Not to the point where I'd drown, but also not to make it easy. It was pushing me as a student. And the idea is pushing your audience member in a safe way to get that scene right. But if the audience member struggles or falters or doesn't know what to do, you're there. You react in real time. And that is something that requires tons of training to get right. But what you'll find is that people that have certain backgrounds in whether it's improv training or being a comedian on the road, you get the sense of these instincts. And I think that's the thing, is you have to test it.
I think something to look at in terms of what kind of performers you cast, right? And where you cast your net. Note that, the first two big and still running, the longest running and most successful immersive shows in New York are Sleep No More and Then She Fell. Both are dance theater pieces. They're movement based. There's very little dialogue in that, and that's something that we don't see actually a lot here in Los Angeles. But they're working with dancers and dancers who are very kinesthetically aware, right? In your company,
Actually, Red Flags, which is a super talky show.
Yeah.
Like you talk constantly for an hour, one-on-one. We actually just cast someone who's a trained dancer. And
who's performed in both those shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, I was going to note on the way you guys work, specifically Lauren, the director in your company, Lauren does a lot of work in Meisner technique, right?
Oh, you kind of stole my thunder.
Oh.
I was going to talk
Go
about
for
it.
it. Yeah, talk about it.
Yeah, so our training process for immersive actors is all about listening skills. And that's listening with your ears, but also with your body. Just a little woo-woo. But listening energetically to a space and to other people. And so to do that, we primarily use viewpoints and Meisner repetition, which is, can you do it with me for a second?
Yeah, sure. You're smiling.
I'm smiling.
You're smiling.
I'm smiling.
You're smiling.
I'm smiling.
You're smiling.
I'm smiling.
You're nodding.
I'm nodding. Yeah.
You're
So
nodding.
you see,
Okay.
you just repeat things over and over, and then it changes over time, and actually character can emerge through that. It's a really fascinating process. But it is all about being connected to someone through eye contact and through listening. So what we look for primarily in auditions, the litmus test for us is eye contact. Is if someone can't make eye contact with us, to do a side one-on-one, or we also ask people to come in and tell us a story. It shouldn't be rehearsed. It's just like, think about, and we give them a prompt that is like a little, pings you a little bit emotionally, but isn't, we're strangers. So that it wouldn't be something so traumatic to tell a stranger to. But like, tell us about like somebody you've lost. Tell us about a time you were disappointed. Something like that. It's kind of, people can go deep if they want to. And then if they tell it like out here, or they're looking around while they're telling us about something that's a little bit charged, it's a sign that this would not be an easy process for them, or that it's maybe not a great fit. Because you have to be able to talk directly to someone while using language that's deeply, deeply emotional in this type of work. We're almost to question time. This is such a big field. We have not covered even everything on my short hour. Let's talk about creative challenges at Fringe in particular. If anything comes up, anything like venues at Fringe, there will be another instance of this panel in the spring that talks more about producing, which is where we'll get into like ticketing, which is a workable challenge with the Fringe website. So anything that you encountered when you did the stars, Tom, anything you saw on the shows you worked on?
So creative challenges? You're saying?
Yeah, creative challenges, venue
I
challenges.
mean, the biggest one is venue. I think the idea is you can have a show in your mind, and then the reality of what's available to you, and can you pull it off? I think it's working in conjunction with the base, because the shows I've worked on, they were not my own, but I was brought in to consult, and seeing the on the paper, before we even seen the space we have, wanting to pull this off, and then walking in the space and seeing, can we pull this off? Here's the space we have, and the reality of adjusting it to make it work, I think is an absolute thing. And it's not, unsurmountable, but I think it's being realistic with the work you have. And I've seen some people get really bent out of shape over, no, it has to be this way. It's like, well, no, take a step back.
Yeah.
What is the intention of what you want to do? There is no space I've seen that's not been able to make it work. It's just being realistic about, you may have to adjust certain things about the physical nature of the space, or how big your back of house is. Maybe there's no back of house. How can you make it work and utilize the tools you have? And I think actually kind of the magic of Fringe actually is there's something about doing work that is through some kind of constraints that the real sort of pleasure comes from designing it.
People don't necessarily do a lot of production-heavy work at Fringe in general. So, but I've seen it done in a couple of non-traditional ways. Like probably the most exciting thing about the immersive element of Fringe, like that wing, is it's usually the place where you'll see some very non-traditional stagings. I have seen shows staged in a box truck where they're able to control a lot of that kind of technical stuff. They load their show in a box truck, park it on the side. Ham Van was totally designed out and was mobile and would like pop up and sometimes would literally drive up and the actors would spill out and perform, right? There are shows that have taken place on Hollywood Boulevard or on Vine. When you're working in public, I would say be conscious of where the homeless encampments are, in a couple of directions.
Lots directions.
Lots of
Yeah.
characters, and I'll talk
Yeah.
about it.
But also like how your story relates to the fact that those are real people and that's where they live.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it can be awkward and kind of like charged sometimes. Like you have to always, when you're making this work, you're thinking about context. What context are you putting people in, and what context is your work appearing in, right? And so there are places where things can get problematic, to say the least. sometimes that's from a level of safety. If you're asking people to, go into something, like go down an alleyway, make sure you know they know which alleyway they're going down, because you might not want to send them down the other alleyway. But that being said, you can you take a black box theater and do some serious design elements? Yeah, or can you play with it in a way you might not normally play with it? 2 years ago, Escape from Godot, which continues to have a lovely run popping up at film festivals these days. What they decided to do was rent the space out for a whole day. So they did a non-traditional run. There was only one day that was running, but they had multiple instances of the show. And that show has been a barn burner success, and it was the talk of the weekend. And everyone was very sad that there wasn't a second day at it. But it was a total experiment. And they took the show over for one day, because of course normally with Fringe, you load your show in and you load your show out, and that's it. But if you're rooting stuff mostly about what's happening between an actor and the audience, and you're not worrying about production elements so much, that is less of an issue.
And to give context for what Escape Godot was, it was literally a production of Waiting for Godot, or Godot as it's supposed to be pronounced apparently, that you were stuck in. The show was looping, and you had to actually help the show move forward. And what was amazing is the actors were really goddamn good. But there was an interactive element where they played with the idea of you actually are sitting in a venue, in a seat, and if you were still in the seats, by the time the lawyers for Beckett's estate arrive, you will get sued for being part of the illegal production. And so it's a brilliant conceit, because the venue is like this, is perfect for it.
Yeah.
And so the idea of, I've seen people play around with the idea that you have to have a huge elaborate production. You can make something that's deeply effective without needing to stage and build an entire set in a black box. It's just as compelling as doing something in an alleyway.
One of my favorite pieces was right in this very room. It wasn't even labeled as immersive. It was called Kership's Coat, and it was a pre-show experience. They built a whole set. They had pre-show music. It was an hour-long show where we sat waiting for the show to start. There was a brilliant program that was completely absurdist, and you just started talking with your neighbor. It was beautiful.
I want to say two things. First, I want to piggyback off what Tommy's saying about you don't need to have. I mean, there's a whole panel about DIY theater making in the next room, but like I like the Peter Brooks idea of like the rough theater of if you are working on a project that you don't have the means to make, then you are working on the wrong project. Work on what's accessible, or if your idea is like inaccessible, make that idea accessible. There are always ways to change an idea to suit the means that you have available to you, in my opinion. I think it's very valuable to be vulnerable. I don't know if anyone in this room is planning to stage any work on Hollywood Boulevard, but what I can say is that we definitely learned a lot of things from that production, and we definitely fucked up a couple times. And I would not stage that show again unless we were able to correct for a couple things. You mentioned knowing about the people who are going to be around. I wouldn't stage a show on the street again unless I could pay a security guard to tail the audience, because we had audience members catcalled, we had an actor threatened, we had an actor, because basically people were on loops over and over again. Every 10 minutes you'd be doing the same scene. So we had bouncers at a hookah bar who picked up on what was happening. And I love this, but the actor found it irritating. They would try to say his lines along with him, which I thought was fucking hilarious. But it threw the actor a little bit,
Just a tiny bit.
But so the catcalling situation was probably the worst, right? Because in the last scene, the performer, who's a woman, holds hands with you, and if it happened to be two young women holding hands, now it's Friday night. You're getting pretty close to Hollywood and Highland at this point, and people are drunk and rude. Right, so nothing bad happened, but we were always, the audience members were always within sight of either myself or my creative partner, Meredith. So we always had an eye on people, but we are not security guards. In retrospect, I wish we had hired a security guard to control for that, because it is a very unpredictable environment. And that's what made the show fun, right? The environment feels alive. You're in Hollywood, and the Hollywood Boulevard becomes the show. It's a spectacle. It's a lot of fun. It corresponds to the material we're working with. But it's the double-edged sword there. The other thing that we ran into is a problem very early on that we immediately corrected for, was that the mechanism we used for transferring audience members is we would put them on a corner, and then the next actor would come and grab them and talk to them and put them on a corner, and the next, someone else would come and grab them. we put an audience member in the corner to be the first actor, and someone came up and started talking to them and invited them to a party, and they thought this was our performer.
No.
So before they started walking away with someone else, our actor, because we had photos of all the audience members, so our actors knew who they were looking for, basically. So our actor was able to come and grab that person, but we were, okay, that's a little scary. We need to tell you names of people of who's going to pick you up, right? So it's,
Right.
okay, Diana's going to come pick you up. Allegra's going to come pick you up. So now the actors had to identify themselves, and now they're in safe hands. Luckily, this was the very first person in our very first test run that happened to. Never happened again, but we controlled for it in case it did. So I want to be transparent. Like I think it's useful to talk about our mistakes. So those were the mistakes we made, and that's what I would have corrected for, if that's useful to you.
Yeah, the reality of playing in the real world is you get people who see everyone walking up to them as a potential performer.
Mm-hmm.
And every alleyway as
Yeah.
just a beautifully set-dressed
Yeah.
Right.
piece of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Working in New Orleans, we had to really dial back a thing I worked on because the previous year, people had wandered down an alleyway at 2 a.m, feeling completely safe. They weren't supposed to, but they felt like you're in this fiction. So when the real world's part of your canvas, be very, very deliberate about having eyes on people or just being overly cautious, because people will start playing as if the world is this safe, happy, space without realizing.
The
Magic
magic circle
circle, yeah.
is laid over
Yes.
the real. When the magic
Yeah.
circle is laid over the real world, you have to take into account that people are playing by play rules and not by real life rules.
So yeah, the gentleman
Even
walking
if that
up,
seems illogical.
The gentleman walking up with a knife. Wow, it's an actor. Oh, he took my wallet. How that's the fear, and that people have been in those situations. So that's obviously an extreme case.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
always operate that you are being protective of people that are being that extreme, because it's better off that you are protective rather than not.
My very Fringe specific advice when it comes to working outdoors as part of this is Friday and Saturday night, maybe not so much. There are other nights of the week that you can set things up and you will get less distracted. You will have fewer problems.
But there are also fewer eyes on the street when something goes wrong.
True.
It's like a busy street is typically a safe street.
The scariest time for us to do the show,
Sociologically.
because we were running that show till I think 11:30, which was when the last show would wrap up, and that's when it got weird, right? If it was Monday night at 11:30, who's out on Hollywood Boulevard Monday night at 11:30? It's a much that feels freakier than 11:30 on a Friday night. There's more people around. They're drunker, but there's lots of people around. So there's a different. You're always balancing. I think for me, it's like. Any of those situations could have been potentially bad. It's the having eyes on the audience and the security, possibly security, that would save you with that situation.
Yeah, I'm gonna say one last thing to wrap this up and switch into our next phase, which is that these are a lot of challenges at Fringe. There's also a big opportunity in that you have so many people who love theater all in the same place, and with that comes great power and great responsibility. You have kind of this captive audience, a festival audience, which like Hamlet Mobile, somebody mentioned, used a lot when we would like show up on the sidewalk and bust out and do sidewalk theater. The thing about sidewalk theater is people can walk away if they don't want to listen to it. That's cool. So that felt like okay to impose upon people. Little different to like go into a bar and do a performance, or go into Fringe Central and do a performance in a way that doesn't let people walk away. So people, I think, have done that in different ways over the years. Like there was one ARG that, everyone was all dressed in white and they were some sort of
You should say what an ARG is.
Oh, an alternate reality game. So it's like again, magic circle over the real world. And it kind of goes on, and it's like, what's real, what's not? It's not my jam, some people's jam. Anyway, but it was very clear that like, they're in a costume. If I don't want to talk to you, I'm good. I'm gonna walk away. And it wasn't like a look at me, look at me. It was sort of unobtrusive, and that felt pretty cool. Whereas like last year I saw somebody come into the plunge here and was like getting ready to like serenade us or something, and the bartender was like, no man, come on, like, no. So consent is
Good
an
on that
important part of
bartender.
that. But you do have this incredible concentration of people, so you can get super creative about how your show works into that festival world.
Yeah. I'd say the difference between those two modes are one was an invitation, right? And the other was an imposition.
One is a hand extended like this,
Yeah.
and the other is like,
Yeah, and invitation's gonna work better 9 times out of 10 than imposition, right? You're asking people to play as opposed to forcing people to play.
Right. Indeed. Okay, that's just scratching the surface, but I think we've talked long enough without hearing from all of you. So if anyone has questions or things they want to hear more about, let's do it. Also keep in mind that there is speed dating later. I'll be there and Tommy will be there if you want to talk about something super nitty-gritty about your show. Yeah. Anybody? Yes.
Just wondering if you can talk a little bit about having someone who's not a performer observing the show in some way where they're not taking people out of the element so they can be there in case something, like a stage manager, someone who's just monitoring the show without being like, I'm clearly not part of the experience, to make sure everything's running smoothly, make sure anyone who doesn't behave inappropriately can be treated.
Yeah.
The question back to you is, can you make them part of the experience?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's there's two sides to it, I think, right? Because on some level, it's nice to feel like everything is in world. On the other hand, it's also really nice to have a clear person you can go to if you have a problem, right? So we had a sandbox show last year that you saw the Deep, and we had 4 different on-site stagehands, one front of house person and 3 stagehands in the space. And it was clear that you could always approach us. I mean, the space was a labyrinth, so it was easy to get lost in there. So it just felt really essential to us to have people on site who were clearly not in character, who you could turn to if you needed help. That felt really important. If you can afford it, video cameras are great. We cannot afford it, so we do not use video cameras, but I've seen a lot of companies use that to effectively monitor scenes, especially if you have like extended one-on-one scenes and everything, and just so someone from a control booth can sit and watch and make sure the show's running effectively. We use actor safe words with everything. If an actor feels uncomfortable, we always have people who are within earshot of them, and they can drop a word that ends the show, basically. So we implement that with our run staff. When it makes sense, we always have radios, because we will often just have staff that can't communicate with each other any other way. So it's good to have radios on site. Is there something? There's so many formats this can take, so it's always going to be different, depending on what the show looks like, about how you want to do that. But I would just recommend always having someone on site who is not in character to respond to emergencies. That's like essential.
Sleep No More in New York specifically uses black masks, and it's a lot of college students who are stationed at places to prevent audience members from going somewhere that they shouldn't. And it's communicated to the audience right up front that it's like, if you see a black mask, obey their instruction, right? You can tweak these things to like hit tone, and again, like how thin do you want your magic circle to be? I think the hardest thing is not the hardest thing. The thing to avoid is do not give your audience contradictory information about how to either tap out of the experience or who they absolutely must obey. Make that crystal clear. And it also, I tend to find it lets the audience free themselves into the world a little bit more if they know that someone will catch them if they fall.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever fuck with safety issues. There are people that like to play with being meta, and not to quote the Matrix, but there are certain rules you should learn that you can bend and certain rules you can break. People that like to play with the meta quality of a safe word, never. Like, there are certain escape rooms that are like, don't touch electrical sockets. That's just general rule of advice. But then they're like, stick a fork in the electrical socket. And then you do, and that one you stick in happens to be fake and create a cool effect, but guess what? You've now implied that every piece of electricity in that room is safe. And it is dangerous, because guess what? They not only do it in that space, but they walk out and go to other experiences with that same idea, well, maybe these ones have that same thing. So the idea, think about the safety rules. It's not only don't give contradictory information, but if there is a safe word or a curtain of safety that you are establishing for people to be able to back out, or for your actors to be able to utilize for safety, do not mess with it. Do not make it in fiction. Like, make a very clear line. That is not to be fucked with.
I want to second. Just really quickly.
Yes.
Some like horror-based immersive shows that are more intense. They always provide you with a safe word up front, And one of the worst instances of this where you're fucking with safety is just using derogatory words where you have to basically insult yourself in order to be pulled out of the experience. Where it's like coward, where you just like call yourself a coward in order to be asked to leave. Like that, I think is actively harmful. You're not allowing people to speak up for what they need.
It's a disincentive to use it.
Exactly.
There's an experience,
or
yeah.
not telling people they won't get a refund if they safe word or something. Like those sorts of things discourage people from actually protecting themselves. So you want to make sure that they always have the tools and are able to, know what they want. They can express that. I don't make horror shows, but I still always have a way for people to get out of the show.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a theater. It's not always clear how to leave the show. So you always need to provide that path out.
There's
and
a
ideally, that if someone is safe wording out of a show, I think the creative ideal is that they get rewarded with a different track or different content. That's at least one idea that's out there these days, is that we should actually be celebrating people who are exercising their consent and revoking it or saying yes or no. Whisper Lodge did this really well. This is a show that's about ASMR, and it's the only time I've ever used a safe word in a show, because something in the show that other people were totally fine with, it just happened to be very triggering for me, and I was like, I don't want to keep going. I don't want to keep going. And the actor responded by like physically stepping away from me, offering me an alternative, and I said, yeah, I do want to do that, and then it was lovely.
That's cool.
I think offering it the check-in, where if the safe word is someone stepping up, especially in an experience where you don't expect people to, because you have no idea what the fuck triggers people. And the idea of being able to check in with the person that calls it out, and because they could call it out because they're having a medical emergency, and they don't want to continue. So the idea of checking in and offering an alternative or a way out. There is a show that utilized the safe word that basically was torturing people with pressure points and requiring them to say the safe word to stop, which is a huge no. What? Yes. And that thing is not cool, because if you're expecting people to use it, if you are, the reactions I'm saying are appropriate. So you see the idea of being able to play with it where you offer alternatives and a way out, but never ever making it part of the show.
Most of you will not, I expect, be playing with extreme haunt content, and indeed the audience for that stuff. I mean, they approach it as one might approach what was that old Joe Rogan, Fear Factor, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's like people who want to be essentially they want to be a contestant on Fear Factor is one way to think about it, right? So it's a very different category. But the lesson to be drawn from those examples and those ideas is this idea of, and this is something that takes in gaming a lot, like fail states, right? You tapping out of the thing. Is there something else that the person can then go do? You might not have the means to create another track, right? Or an alternate thing within the experience. What you want to be doing is when you're designing your work, if for some reason, and I think there's something important that Tommy said, like you don't know what's going to trigger someone. So there was a show, very gentle show, and someone just got freaked out because of this. They did not want their hand held. They were not told that they were going to be touched. When I was first told about this, I was like, what? But one of the things we did was we modified how we list shows at No Proscenium to have a contact advisory. So even if there's just gentle contact, there are some people who don't want to be touched at all. And you want to...
And that's okay.
Yeah. And the thing is this, you want to give those people a chance to not come to your show. You want to signal to them that this is going to happen. Now, if you want people who have that issue to still come to your show, you want to know they do, give them a chance to talk to you, and set something up so they can still proceed through it without. There are people who are experimenting these days with ways of physical identifications for revocable consent, right? That's a very technical way of saying there's a show I know where they give you a lay if you don't want to be touched. And you can put it on, and this signals to the people, don't touch me.
That's cool.
And then at any point, you can take it off.
I like that.
Right?
That's cool.
And it's very simple, it's very gentle. I mean, hell, you go to Sephora these days apparently, and there are two baskets. There's a red basket that says I want to be helped, and there's a black basket that says do not talk to me while I'm shopping.
There's a show
We
I'm
got
working
we
on.
got so far off topic.
Yes. Do you want to do a last word on this, and then we'll go to the next? Do you have?
No, I was saying
You're
we
ready.
should ask more questions.
Let's ask another
We can talk
question.
about this for forever.
Yeah, we could
obviously.
talk forever. Yeah.
For something like this, I find it so helpful when like the medium takes a million shapes, the most helpful resources, hearing from people who've done it. Can you guys just give like a list of just any institutions or schools of thought, or like basically things where there are more resources like experienced people like you that I can hear from about this?
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
do that.
We should plug the organization that we're all a member of.
Yeah.
Leia, the League of Experiential and Immersive Artists.
Yeah. And
Leia.design.
This panel was
Yeah.
hosted by
Yeah.
Leia.
LEI.design is the website. I run a website called No Proscenium. This is what we do. There is a glossary at NoPro. I believe it's accessible from the front page. The front page changes a lot. We cover everything obsessively. There's 223 episodes of the podcast, which contains all kinds of discussions of this. There are discussions specifically around safety. There's a lot of case studies for specific shows. There's a Facebook group called Everything Immersive, which is also one of the touchstones of the community.
There's a Slack called Everything Immersive.
The Slack's actually the No Pro
Oh, the
Slack.
No Pro Slack, sorry.
And those are the resources just that I have a hand in the till on. There's a lot of professors at CalArts who are poking around these days.
USC has a program.
USC
Yeah.
has a program.
So USC actually has a
Yeah.
program. They're interested in this in the theater department as well as the School of Cinematic Arts.
Yeah, in
And
the
so
games division.
there are other kind of tangent industries as well where you can. I've found really interesting, even though they're like not my world. So cinema is one. Game design
Yeah.
is another
Yeah.
huge area. So there's an organization called Indiecade. It's actually a festival of independent games. It just happened last month. But poking around their website would probably get you to some cool places.
Just go see shows. I mean, the biggest
Yeah.
thing is that what I find fascinating is the fact that you have people that are in traditional proscenium-based theater, who are involved in AR and VR, who are involved in theme park design. This is sort of the landscape we all play in. And the idea of the lessons you can learn from, Beckett and an escape room and make an experience that is entirely enjoyable and has, standing in both is fascinating. And that there is no shortage of the colors of the palette you can paint with. So I think the idea is whatever you're interested in doing, this is the Fringe. What I love is that I don't know what I'm going to get. And everyone is equal. Everyone has a black box or a small space that you can play with and pilot and do weird shit in. And find and sort of learn for yourself, because this is a space where you have to do a lot of things, and we've all played around in the space and seen sort of the magic of being able to take an experience and develop it through sort of an iterative process. And this is your chance to iterate and learn for yourself what you want to play with. And I would say if you're interested in gamifying something or doing devised work or doing whatever it is, go read it and see it. And find the stuff that speaks to you and then experiment with it.
Yeah.
Because this is your chance to experiment with it with, the chance through both scholarships or sort of low impact, renting a space and getting a couple performers and trying something out. This is the chance to get it on its legs and find what works for you.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to say for you, if you're like me, you want to read about historically, what types of shows have happened in this space, what's the lineage of this type of work. The word immersive theater has not been being used for that long. It seems like it only started getting used in the 90s or 2000s. If you want to read about stuff that uses these principles, but came before that, you're looking for environmental theater. You're looking for the happenings that would on the happening scene, and a lot of performance artists throughout history, throughout the last couple decades, have used a lot of these principles. So you have other things that are not technically going to be listed as immersive. But that's where the lineage is at for this type of work. That's where if you want to read about shows that use these principles that happened before the recent, immersive kind of explosion.
Yeah.
Those are the words to look for.
But nothing takes the place of going to see the work, right? It's perfectly possible for someone to make a film without having ever seen a film or a television show. You can pick up a camera and figure it out for yourself. And the same is true here, but you will learn a hell of a lot about what does and doesn't work for you by going and experiencing it firsthand.
Let's do another question.
guys mentioned sort of like difficult audience members.
Mhm.
I just wanted to ask, how would you guys recommend bringing in audience members who maybe are present but are more considering like, oh, this show isn't for me, I'm not a part of this?
Do you mean getting them in the door, like getting them to buy a ticket, or
No.
making them feel a part of the experience while they're there?
As in, they're already in the door, but making them feel more included and not like, oh, my kid sister dragged me to this kind of thing.
Good.
You go first.
Yeah, I just feel
I
like
think that's on it.
clarity is like the number one word you can
Yeah.
use. I think I feel most comfortable when I know what I can and can't do, right? Because I think for me, I always think about, my parents are always my go-to example of like, because I know my parents don't go to a lot of shit like this. So I'm like, how would they respond if they were in this room? They would probably have no idea what's going on. How do I clarify what they can and can't do, right? So I think about some people like to do like the rule setting of the world. Like if you can't talk, they'll tell you that in character or in some way. I find it very helpful to do it out of character so there's no ambiguity, right? To say, okay, before you walk into this space, you can do this, this, and this. You shouldn't do this, this, and this. And that way you know, I mean, you know what you can do then. You know how the game works and you feel a lot more comfortable. If I walk into a space and I have to like learn over the course of 15 minutes by watching the actors what I'm supposed to be doing or not, then it's more confusing. It's asking you to think about it harder, and ultimately I think it's more intimidating to new people. So I just think upfront clarity. We even do that like we send a pre-show email to everybody and tell them, here's what you're looking for when you arrive. Here are the rules. We'll tell you them again when you get here. But like so you can prepare for it. I can get in the car on my way to the show and already know, okay, I'm not allowed to speak at the show. I don't have to worry about that, you know.
Speaking to that specific example you gave, like, oh, so-and-so brought me here, that's actually a big deal. And most of our major issues in large shows, not in one-on-ones, are because of that, or because somebody else bought a friend a ticket and brought them, and they had no idea. We actually had a very large problem in Rochester with a family member, or like a family member of a cast member brought. And he like left the show in the middle. It was not great. It's not great. And he became convinced actually that his friend, the aunt of the performer, was trying to convert him. Like it was a real church. Like, well,
That sequence is triggering for a lot of people.
but it was extreme. But so being super clear in that kind of situation, that you can even go as far as like when you see people buy multiple tickets, make sure you touch base with them, which is something I actually haven't done before, but I think I might start doing. It seems like
I want to give some concrete examples in this, but start with a general principle. Lower the stakes and invite them in. Like, ease them into it. We talk about onboarding, and you think of it like a ramp, and you know, a ramp starts at a low grade and then kind of works itself up, right? Before you want to ease those people in to the scenario. What flipped me into being someone who knew that this was going to be my life's work was in Then She Fell. There was a moment where, you know, after seeing a scene I did not like, that was very performative, and I was like, why did I go to this mess? Another performer came by and said, would you like some tea? And since Then She Fell's about Alice in Wonderland, I knew like, oh, it's the Mad Tea Party. And also, I could say nothing but yes, but when you boil it down, would you like some tea is very low stakes, right? So you're inviting them in, something small, get them to that first yes, and then carry them into bigger and bigger and bigger things, right? When it comes to the rules on onboarding people that way and giving, you know, clearance, and people wanting to do stuff in world or out of world, Sleep No More does something very interesting if we look at mechanically. They have a lounge that everyone goes to as like, you get an email ahead of time that says all the things. A lot of people aren't going to read the email. It's just not going to happen, so you got to reiterate it, right? You can also do too much reiteration, but that's another problem. But at Sleep No More, you know, they hand you your mask, they've got all these things, and right before they actually send you off, after you've been hanging out in the lounge for a while, after you've been sort of marinating in the tone of the world and getting the vibe, then they hit you with the final rules. And they give it in the tone of the world, but they are very clear that they want your mask on and for you to be quiet, because it's no more talking from here on out once you go through these doors. But they've already brought you into the tone. Yeah. And that's something that people in this town don't play with so much. there's a lot of lessons in terms of the work that's been done already that even the companies who make that work then abandon for whatever reason. And there's just a lot of tools that are really, really useful that can be picked up here and there.
We have time for,
Oh, I just want to say one more thing.
yeah, and then we have time for one more question.
Real quick, you can't make a show for everyone. That's the thing to imagine. Someone coming in, you cannot control.
Yeah.
The idea is that they may be in a bad mood, someone may have died, maybe they don't belong in the show. You can't control that. And so the idea of admitting that, open up the possibilities for setting expectations carefully, doing all the things recommended, but realize that at a certain point, an audience member who is not having it, you can't make happen. You're not making a show for everyone. So just the biggest principle is making sure if someone is being disruptive, they can be quieted and they're not affecting it for everyone else. Because if someone's in a pissed off mood, if you can find a way to check in with them, make sure they're still okay, they don't want to leave, they're not disrupting anyone else, and they're not like spoiling the mood for everyone else. So figure out a way to help check in with them if they want to go or leave, and if they just want to stay, you can't fight that, but just making sure the show is built in a way that person cannot sow seed the discontent for everyone else.
One more?
Have you seen any, or have you done any kind of like tech-heavy shows, like maybe using projections or stuff like that? And is that maybe more of a challenge?
Well, it's certainly going to be a challenge at Fringe because of the way that venues typically book their time slots, which is a quick load in, quick load out. So it's a challenge. I have done, in my previous life, I was producing these big musical sketch comedy shows, and I did those at Fringe for years, and that was a lot. So we could talk maybe afterward about that. If you can make it work, make it work. I would say my advice always to people at Fringe in general, and specifically when you've got a lot of pieces in motion, is make sure you have enough people and then get one more person. So that you, as the writer, director, producer, whatever those hats you're wearing, make sure you only have 2 hats on the day of the show.
Let me drill down here. Are you thinking about an interactive piece that has a lot of projections in it, or are you thinking about taking a black box and doing a projection mapping into the space?
Just thinking about both, like
Okay.
maybe involving the audience with that, or just projecting like while you're performing.
Yeah.
Testing is really valuable. The challenge, I love working with technology, especially in a physical space. With escape rooms, they're easy because that is a permanent venue where when you build the tech and you playground safe it, it can function. Dealing with a thing where you've got to transport it and set it up, I've seen so many gremlins and technical failures go wrong, and then your show is not going to happen. So I would say test each piece and make sure you can test and transport it carefully, because that's the hardest part, is making sure your tech works. Because if you have such a tech-reliant show, and if it's not working, you don't have a show, then you don't have a show.
Yeah.
So I would test out individual pieces and just moving it back and forth to the point where you can basically have a troubleshooting guide for every gremlin, for every piece of technology you have. Because I think that's why the load-in time is such a logistical hurdle to get through. If you are proven on that part and you can nail that every single time, then I'd feel more comfortable using it. But just make sure you get that part down.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some artists like Dandy Punk who, but those tend to be environmentally immersive. But I would look at what Dandy Punk was doing at Sundance a couple of years ago, in terms of establishing like a third of 360 space with projection mapped elements. But that's also predominantly like Dandy Punk's performing opposite those, and it's a lot of rehearsal. And there's people like Team Lab and some other folks in terms of the installation art kind of scenario. I mean, I could see someone, building like an environment that was projection mapped the hell out of, and then have that be like an interactive environment that people could like move around. Much the same way that I've seen that done with a central performer. Like it's definitely not impossible, but the load factor is the big one. That would be the kind of thing where I might think like, oh, maybe I just set it up for a day in the space, so I control the space.
Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. We're at our time, but there's still more fun to be had all day. So thanks to the Hollywood Fringe for having us. Again, we are all from Leia. Our website is leia.design. If you want to get involved with us, we would love that. Thank you, panelists, for taking the time this morning, and thank all of you, and best of luck with all your shows.
Thanks, Bobby.